The first Section 2 of the Finance Act 2016 sought to change the universal social charge. The USC, you'll recall, was introduced around 2009, originally as an income levy by the late Brian Lennon, and it was done in response to trying to gather up lots of money really quickly by introducing this tax, and especially broadening the tax base, because one of the central tenets to the economic crisis was the fact that we had eroded the tax base so significantly over the previous decade. So this was a significant step back on that front, and indeed Brian Lennon took it a bit further, and he would have followed a kind of philosophy that anybody that earns any money at all should contribute something to government coffers, no matter how small. And the intention behind that really is the philosophy that anybody that contributes to a society has more of a purchase within that society or has a stake within the country, and that even a small amount should be allowed to be contributed by them for that purpose. But unfortunately, romantic philosophies like that fell away when the politicians get more involved in it, and that's what's happened since really. It is continuing to be eroded away. It's a really, really very significant tax for government. It raises somewhere in the order of €4 billion per annum. And the flip side of that is it's particularly hated by taxpayers because it's very, very expensive. And I don't know if many of you do income tax returns, but when you are doing them, you should just have a look at the level of universal social charge of its own, of the tax liability, and consider a time not that long ago when that tax wasn't due, because it's an enormous component of any income tax liability now. And the result of that is that I think politicians are getting an awful lot of stick and abuse about it. And Fine Gael have made some commitments to try and abolish it, but in truth, to be honest, it's very difficult to see that kind of situation developing, given the fact that it catches so much money by reason of the fact of not being deductible for pension purposes or not being deductible for capital allowance purposes. Everything gets cut, and it's a huge generator for government. So civil servants love it, politicians hate it, and it will be interesting to see how it develops. But for the purpose of the Finance Act 2016, the changes were to reduce the lower rates of USC by 0.5%. So the rate of 1% went down to 0.5%, the 3% rate was down to 2.5%, and the 5.5% rate went to 5%. Generally speaking, individuals are subject to 8% on anything over €70,000, except those who are self-employed, who become subject to USC of 11% on anything over €100,000. A fairly stark anomaly that hasn't quite been addressed in regard to why it is that somebody who's self-employed earning €110,000 should be paying 3% more USC than perhaps Enda Kenny or maybe somebody who runs the banks. So that is a difficulty for them, because it does seem a bit harsh that the self-employed get caught for the higher 3% on amounts over €100,000, but that is the way it is. The other thing I would say is that the 5% universal social charge is also applicable in respect of capital allowances or Section 23 capital allowances. You might recall that Fianna Fáil sought to abolish Section 23 allowances in or around 2009, and that was met with a lot of stern opposition, on account of the fact that people had purchased tax incentive properties in locations where you probably wouldn't park your car in order to secure some tax advantage as a write down against a rental income, and the thought that the government could retrospectively deny them that relief was met with a lot of anxiety and lobbying to change it. And to that extent they did. Fine Gael changed it, and the compromise was that if it was that you had Section 23 relief, and if it was that you wanted to use it, that the Section 23 relief would remain available. However, those earning over €100,000 would be subject to an additional 5% surcharge. Interestingly, on the USC, those changes there to reduce the rate by 0.5% on the 3 lower bands came at a cost of $335 million on an annual basis. And $335 million of a cost is actually about 10 or 20 million shy of the entire capital acquisitions tax take for a year. So you see the difficulty the government are going to have in abolishing this thing, if that's really what they're intent on doing. The money that comes from it is just so big that it's difficult to see it happening. I've seen that Leo Varadkar last week was speaking of second-class citizens who didn't have pension provision and noble aspirations to provide it for them. But one of the things he did say, which was notable, was he spoke about merging PRSI and USC. And I said you could see something like that happening, whereby USC actually is abolished by morphing into PRSI and being charged at 10% or something of that nature. But it just seems unrealistic at the moment. Maybe things will change and coffers will improve so dramatically that they will be able to get rid of it. But it does come at a cost. As I said, the small reduction of 0.5% in the 3 lower rates costs 335 million, which is pretty much the CAT take for any given year.